You are welcome to Tuntum Network. I'm Cyrus. This video will get your blood boiling, I promise you, with the depth of information I'm going to share with you on what has transpired between France and the rest of the Francophone African countries in terms of their currency and their financial structure since independence, ladies and gentlemen. This is the one video you want to watch in full to the very end because of the lessons it presents to us all in Africa. So position yourself properly and let me walk you into this. Come with me. So in 1960, 17 African countries gained their independence. 14 out of those 17 newly independent countries were French colonies. So when France agreed to their demand of self-government, on their way out, they put in their independence clauses an agreement that would ensure that all these new countries in Africa will continue the usage of a currency system called Colonies Françaises d'Afrique, which actually translates French colonies in Africa post-independence. France put this clause in that agreement. That's the meaning of CFA, by the way. CFA means French colonies in Africa. A silly, stereotypical description of a currency that undermines the independence of its users. This currency was originally introduced by the French government in 1945 and was introduced in two parts to two different groups of French colonies, the XAF and the CFA, where the XAF will be the version of the CFA for Francophone countries in Central Africa, and CFA will be those in the west of Africa. Now, the idea behind these currencies was to be pegged to the franc of old, their old currency, which is now euro, and also to be guaranteed convertibility to the franc at a fixed rate. Let me simplify that whole thing for you. The idea behind this currency was to help the French government to make meaning of how to quantify or price transactions with their former colonies using a currency conversion that they would understand. However, in order for this agreement to be profitable to the French government required a portion of their foreign reserves deposited with the French treasury. I repeat, in order for it to be profitable to the French government required all these new Francophone countries to keep 65% of their foreign exchange reserves with the French central bank. In simple terms, this is what it means. Since I have agreed to grant you your independence, you are going to be using a currency I have made for you to trade with me. And for that reason, I require that 65% of all your foreign earnings be kept with me so I can provide you a fixed foreign exchange rate. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the long and short of the whole CFA Franc agreement in 1961. Meaning that every time France trades with these colony countries, 65% portion of the colony's country's earnings that is supposed to be sent to these African countries will rather be kept in Paris by the French treasury. This was what the first president of these newly independent African countries agreed to. It was enacted in 1961, and for 60 years, all these countries using the XAF and the CFA were having a greater portion of their foreign exchange earnings kept in France. 65% of their earnings, ladies and gentlemen. This was the case until the year 2005, when the percentage was reduced from 65 to 50% in a reformed agreement. Now, these are the presidents of those newly independent Francophone countries at the time who signed their signatures to the 1961 CFA agreement with France to deposit 65% of their foreign exchange earnings with the French treasury. These are their names. President Léopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal in 1960. President Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Ivory Coast also in 1960. Niger President Hamini Diori in 1960. Congo Brazzaville President Fulbert Yolo in 1960. Central African President David Daku. Cameroonian President Amadou Ahidjo. And Chad President Francois Tombalbaye. Again, we also had Gabon President Leon Mba Benin President Hubert Maga, and Burkina Faso President Maurice Yamiogo. All these presidents agreed and happily joined in the making of that agreement at the time, ladies and gentlemen. However, Malian President Modibo Keita and Togolese President Sylvanus Olympio were the two presidents who initially were skeptical about it and actually went ahead and created their own currencies until later when they rejoined for many harsh reasons. A country like Guinea took inspiration for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and rejected that offer and made its own currency called the Guinea franc, which is still in circulation as their national currency even till today. Remember, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah became an honorary co-president of Guinea at some point after his overthrow in 1966. Now, because of the implementation of this agreement, all these African francophone countries became restricted in terms of their sovereignty when it comes to international trade. They couldn't buy or sell on the international market without the involvement of France. Why? Because they controlled their reserves. They were meant to prioritize France for every raw material produced in their countries before trading with any other country. That explains why, ladies and gentlemen, from 1930s to the 60s, France's GDP was growing slowly from $50 billion to $55 billion to $60 billion by 1960 in 30 years. But the moment this agreement was enacted, from 1961 to 1970, France's GDP jumped from $60 billion to $148 billion. This happened in 10 years of keeping 65% of all foreign earnings of 17 African countries in France. So from 1970 to 1980, it jumped again to $701 billion from $148 billion. By 1990, France's GDP was $1.2 trillion. Not because France was producing something special, no, but because they were keeping and trading with the foreign reserves of their colonies. Today, the GDP of France is above $3 trillion, majority of which was built on the backs and the sweats and the resources of these poor African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, it is estimated that France holds at least 10 billion euros in trust for each of these African countries. These are the monies France gives out or gives back to these same African countries as loans with interest. These are the monies French government gives to its citizens as loans with interest at no benefit to these African countries, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the bedrock and the foundation on which the modern French economy has been built in the last 6 to 7 decades until recently. Their intention, even now, is to continue with the same strategy. When they say they provide these countries with assistance and protection, it's ironically laughable in the sense that it is the same Africans' monies they provide to them as loans or assistance, and they are the very people behind the constant eruption of tribal and religious instabilities in those countries, ladies and gentlemen. Africa needed a cleanup exercise. The Francophone countries were in dire need of someone with the bravery and intelligence to outsmart the French government at their own game, and that's why they hate what's happening in the Sahel region. For the first time in their history, they see not just one man, but 3 of them who have formed a bloc with the sole agenda of getting rid of France and their extortions. They see a bloc of Francophone military leaders who have the support of the international community, ladies and gentlemen, through social media, something the previous military regimes like Thomas Sankara didn't have. Now we have it. So for the first time in real time, everything is open to the entire world to process. This is how Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and Abdourahmane Tiani of the Sahel region are beating France at their own game. They used to use traditional media to push their propaganda, but it has turned on their heads. There is nothing they have ever done for any African country for free. It has always come with strings attached. But I have a message for the French nationals, for the people of France. To the French people of France who claim to be diplomatic and democratic and preaches the rule of law and fairness. You have to be very ashamed of your country's leadership over the last 6 decades for taking advantage of vulnerable African nations for this long and still wanting more. You have to be ashamed of how bad and how long you have mistreated black people as second-class citizens in your country, when the truth is they are the reason your country is even prosperous in the first place. You have to be very ashamed of yourself. Did you know that whenever the CFA countries need dollars or other currencies for international trade, they must first convert through the French treasury, which involves fees? Did you know that it is estimated that France earns between 200 to 500 million euros per year in interest alone from these reserves, depending on the global interest rates? And did you know that in 2020, when the CFA countries became agitated and pushed for a scrap on the percentage of their foreign reserves with the French government agreed, ladies and gentlemen, to an introduction of a new currency instead called the ECO, and that had the CFA officially dropped. But this ECO currency never got launched or never materialized. Did you know all these? Till today, the 50% reserve rule still applies, and you wonder why Traore and Coup had to take up guns. The worst is yet to come in the coming months. I tell you, France, there is coming a time when you will have zero presence in Africa. That's your future, and you should embrace it and prepare for that day. France has never been an ally of any African country. France has always kept their relationship with Africans as a slaver and a slave, and that is how it has always been, and they will never change. Let's arise and get rid of them for good and take our destiny into our own hands, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for taking time to watch this episode for today. Remember to subscribe and click on the notification bell to watch all of my videos. I'll come your way again with another one. God bless the Sahel region, and God bless you for watching. It's bye-bye for now.